you know the way I do my work. I don't do mocks. I don't do lists.
Nope.
I love the process of evaluating players.
Yep.
So I really like De'Zhaun Stribling's tape.
When it comes to discussing the 49ers strategy with all their new players and the tactics surrounding Brock Purdy and company, there is nobody better in the world to talk to than NFL Films' Greg Cosell. He's got thoughts on De'Zhaun Stribling, Kaelon Black, and the 49ers' other draftees.
So I went back and I watched his tape at Oklahoma State, and I saw there what I didn't see on the tape at Ole Miss. He worked between the numbers really, really well. Well, I really like him as a runner. I never know who's going to draft a player, obviously, when I evaluate a player, because this is all done before the draft. But when they drafted him, I thought to myself, that fits, because he is a downhill runner. He runs mean. He runs nasty. There's no hesitation. There's no tentativeness to him. He's just a really, really strong downhill runner. He'll initiate contact. He's I remember, and you probably saw this too, he ran over Dylan Thieneman this year. He's one of those backs that you look at, and he's a true sustaining back. And he's got enough juice that if a hole's there, he can take it to the house, but he's not a burner. But he's a grinder and a sustainer, and he runs really, really hard.
And Greg also has top-notch Brock Purdy takes. He's able to tie everything together.
But, it's a trait to be able to execute an offense at a high level efficiently and distribute the football. That's a trait, So otherwise, what, Drew Brees and Tom Brady didn't have any good traits? I mean, that's ultimately, and that's what Brock Purdy is.
So here's the full interview with Greg Cosell covering the 2026 49ers draft class as we turn the page to the offseason program. Maybe finally a little bit of a breather after that draft season?
Yeah, believe me, as I said to you before we started talking here, that since last August, I guess, this past weekend was the first weekend I did not work. So I probably worked 7 days a week since last August, but that's kind of the way it goes.
And you're already on to 2027 prospects.
Well, you know what? Here's the way I do it, David. The season and is totally different for me than watching players in the draft, because during the season I'm very much more focused on schemes, tactics. I couldn't tell you who the best left guard in the league is. I don't. That's not the way I watch tape during the season. I love the schematics of the game more than anything else, the tactics of the game. But then when I switch and start watching the draftable players, and I get to about 220 of them in detail, because, to me, I have to do it in detail. I don't watch 20 plays, and I'm not watching YouTube highlights. I'm watching, game tape. So I do about 220 players. So I'm more focused on the individuals, although you have to have some sense of what they're asked to do, but not as much as when I'm watching the schematics and tactics of the NFL. So now that the draft's over, I can kind of breathe a little bit. And so what I do now is I kind of pop on about maybe 80, 100 guys who are likely to be in next year's draft, get a foundation for who they are. And then beginning, probably July 1st or so, I'll start going back over NFL things, because, like, let's say the Niners, like, what I can't do during the season is, let's say, watch 6 games in a row of their offense. I can't do that during the season, because each week I've got to try to watch as many games as I can. So if you watch, let's say, a team either on offense or defense, 5 or 6 games in a row, you really get a feel for their tactics, their approach. Let's say it's the Niners, what their run game looks like, what their pass game looks like. So that's what I then do. So maybe starting July 1st, leading into the season.
So speaking of the Niners, and really maybe tying together performance during the season that you obviously watched last year with what they've tried to add in this draft class, and I guess in free agency as well, I think that it was obvious that one of their big issues last year was getting open, separation, the receiver position. And De'Zhaun Stribling was their first pick this year, number 33. He's been a lightning bolt of discussion just because of where mock drafts or whatever put him. I know neither you nor I care about that, but we care about the evaluation of De'Zhaun Stribling. How do you think he fits the 49ers, specifically with how they need to fix that receiver problem?
Well, all I can tell you is, you know, the way I do my work, I don't do mocks, I don't do lists.
Nope.
I love the process of evaluating players.
Yep.
So I really like De'Zhaun Stribling's tape. You know, so to me, that doesn't have anything to do with where he might go in the draft. What was interesting to me is obviously when you just look at the measurables, they're phenomenal. He's over 6'2", he's 207 pounds, he ran a 4.36, and by the way, the time speed shows up in his play speed. I thought that he also had short area burst. He's obviously got accelerating long speed. He ran by and got on top of corners. The thing that was interesting to me is when I watched him in Ole Miss offense, you know, there were certain things I didn't see, and I didn't see him work between the numbers a lot. So, you know, I said to myself when I was done, because I really liked everything else I saw, I said, you know what? He's had a lot of success at Oklahoma State the year before, where he actually caught more balls than he did at Ole Miss. So I went back and I watched his tape at Oklahoma State, and I saw there what I didn't see on the tape at Ole Miss. He worked between the numbers really, really well. So when I saw that, it gave me a much broader picture of the player. And combined with the size, the speed, I mean, that profile is phenomenal, that size-speed profile. And then seeing him work between the numbers and make tough hands catches, being able to catch away from his frame, the run after catch ability because he's got a ton of juice. I just came away thinking this guy is a really, really good prospect. And, you know, as I said, I don't make lists, so it's not like, well, where, you know, was he fourth best, fifth best? That's not really relevant to me. I just really liked the player as a prospect. So, again, I don't really care about mocks. I don't care what a consensus is, nor should teams, by the way. You know, you evaluate the player and you think about how he might fit into your system. And, you know, you're dealing with a 49er team that obviously it's really important to have run after catch because they throw a lot of short timing passes where you'd really like your receivers to be able to then generate yardage on their own. They're not really a vertical passing team. You know, don't forget a fade ball is not necessarily a vertical throw the way teams think of vertical throws. But Stribling certainly has vertical ability. You would assume a healthy Mike Evans will be their boundary X. But Stribling has the ability to do that. And again, Evans is not going to play for 5 more years. So, you know, we'll see. But Stribling was a really fascinating prospect to me.
As soon as I saw the size speed, I knew that they probably have some designs for X receiver down the road for him. But the immediate fit is in that big slot where Jawan Jennings was, except Jawan ran what, a 4.7? The speed was a bit of an issue there. It's a really good player. And we've been talking about it, 4.36 for Stribling. You know, Greg, one of the I think it was against LSU, one of the clips that really stuck out to me. He was a lead blocker on a
and that's
Kyle
another
Shanahan
reason
thinks he's the best blocker in this draft out of all the
and that's another reason they drafted him. And obviously, when you draft a receiver, the number one thing is the receiving ability, you know. But you always would like your receivers to be tough and physical. And the Niners, because of the way they structure their formations, with receivers very often having tight splits, meaning closer to the formation, very often wide receivers are required to block. And again, you don't have to pancake people. You don't have to put a linebacker or a safety in the dirt. You just have to have some physicality and commitment. And Stribling certainly showed that. So in many ways, he fits the Niners and he gives them a lot of, you know, potential vertical juice because, I mean, that 4.36, that showed up on tape.
And it's exactly what the 49ers need with their separation issues, speed issues downfield. Purdy's been accurate, obviously, and he has another target. I love what you mentioned about the Oklahoma State tape. I went all the way back to the Wazoo tape, and I mean, this is something new, I think, and maybe you've discovered this too, watching so much tape with NIL and the transfer portal. This is a guy who played for 3 different schools. It's almost like he was a mini professional already because he, you know, has changed systems so many times. In the past, that this just wasn't a thing, right? When you're evaluating prospects, maybe they go to 2 schools, but 3 where he was productive at all 3. So
he was
and you get a chance to see him in 3 different systems. So it's probably a much more complete eval.
Well, the thing too is if I wasn't intrigued by what I saw with his Ole Miss tape, I wouldn't have gone back. I would have just said, you know what, I think he's, you know, nice player, nice prospect, but I was really intrigued with the Ole Miss tape, David, and therefore I said, you know what, I just want to see if I can see a little more, some things that I didn't see on the Ole Miss tape. And obviously I saw it on the Oklahoma State tape, and I came away with a much fuller picture of the player. And as I said, I really, really liked him. I mean, I spoke to some coaches who really liked him as well. Again, coaches are different than I am. They have to, in a sense, put a round on him. They have to, they have to grade him. I don't do that. I just enjoy the process of evaluating him, and have no idea where he's going to be drafted. But I have to tell you, when I saw the pick, it's funny. I don't think in terms of anything being a surprise, and I'll tell you why. Because to the team, it's not a surprise, So to me, I always take the approach, because I know what I do. I take the approach that a team that has, a ton of scouts who do this 12 months out of the year, has really smart people who know football. Does that mean every team gets every pick right? Of course not. No one does, because no matter what, when all's said and done, it's still human beings evaluating human beings. That's an imperfect process. But, because of sitting here watching tape, the people who watch tape for a living, I have tremendous respect for. So when a team drafts a guy, I mean, it's like when the Titans drafted Carnell Tate, and it's, oh, what a surprise. Well, it's not a surprise to the Titans. So just like, drafting Stribling, and as you know, Kyle was on, I think it was Rich Eisen, and kind of explained the whole process. And when you hear the explanation, you know what? It makes perfect sense. You know how it is. The people on TV, and I guess I'm one of them. I mean, I don't do the draft shows, but I mean, obviously
you're actually doing the work. Yeah.
Yeah. The people who are on TV, what they're basically saying is, here's how I evaluate the player. That's all they're saying. So instead of saying, well, the team made a mistake, no, the team didn't make a mistake. All the team did is evaluate it differently, the player differently than you did. It's not nothing's a mistake right now, and nothing is wrong right now. This is how the Niners evaluated De'Zhaun Stribling. This is how I evaluated De'Zhaun Stribling. Maybe that's different than how Mel Kiper did. And you know what? That's fine. That's what Mel Kiper should say. Not say that, hey, that's a bad pick. He should say, hey, I didn't see him that way. That's what, I've said that many times when I've done shows. I say, hey, they obviously, what they saw on tape, they liked him more than I did. We'll find out how it plays out.
Because nobody has seen him in the NFL level, right? We don't know either way.
Right, exactly.
I think, Greg, there's a problem now because people just can't say, I don't know, let's wait and see. There has to be a conclusion. Whereas we can just look at the tape and say, this is what I liked, and wait. But there's this drive for finality with every single statement now. But
it's funny you say that, because there have been former players who I know well who actually say to me that, hey, you know what I really like most about the way you do your work? And I say, what's that? They said, well, number one, you obviously know what you're talking about. But number two, if you don't know something, you actually say, I don't know the answer to that. And that actually tells me more about you and your work than if you acted like you knew everything. All I do is evaluate the players. I really like De'Zhaun Stribling. That's all I can tell you.
Well, let's move on to evaluating another guy who played for a bunch of different schools, 5 different colleges in 6 years, for Romelo Height, who was the 49ers pick at number 70. Edge rusher. Now, this is another one, Greg, where we can talk about an interesting combination of 49ers in-season scheme and the prospect. They've got a new defensive coordinator, Raheem Morris.
Yeah.
It has been stated by both Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch they're going to be interested in some edge rushers who might be able to drop back in coverage a little bit more, because we know that Raheem Morris has some history coordinating those types of defenses. So there's a natural kind of spot for the 49ers to replace Bryce Huff with a speed rusher. But they also like Romelo Height because he had a pass breakup. I just watched it on a coverage drop. I think they're going to be using him in some creative ways that we typically haven't seen from the 49ers defense over the past decade.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very interesting with him because, he doesn't weigh a lot, but he's very, very bendy. And that to me is the interesting. There's an explosiveness to him. The concern would be, and again, because they have a new coordinator, and don't forget, Raheem's been in a lot of different systems now, so it's not just one system that he's been in where he's only done one thing in his career. He's been in a lot of systems. And Romelo Height is about 6'3". He weighed 239 at the combine. His arm length isn't really long, but he plays long because of the way he looks long on tape. And that's what really, I was kind of surprised about his arm length because as I said, I think he plays long on tape. He's very loose. He's very fluid. He's got some twitch and bend to his movement. He's got a gliding feel to his movement. The question is, can he gain a little weight? Maybe he can, maybe he can't. I certainly don't know the answer to that. But he has natural quickness. He has change of direction. He has sudden burst off the ball. He showed a dynamic inside spin move as well when he was at Texas Tech. So it'll be interesting to see how he's deployed in the context of their defense. Obviously, they were looking for pass rush. They're going to get Bosa back. They traded for Odigizua, who's a very good interior pass rusher. So I'd be very curious to see how they deploy him. Obviously, he's not going to play 60 snaps a game. We'll see. But, he certainly has that kind of looseness and fluidity and sort of Gumby-like feel to his movement. But he just doesn't weigh a lot. Now, that, again, there have been guys who don't weigh a lot who can rush the quarterback. If they can get him up even to 245, 246, I mean, think of someone like Nick Bonito, who's 248, and he's turned out to be a very, very good pass rusher. So maybe they can get Height, although he is a grown man already. He's not 20 years old.
Yeah,
but
25.
Still, right, maybe you can get him up to 245, 246, and that would be fine.
And, we'll see, too, schematically. You began that answer talking about Raheem Morris. He's been in a bunch of different systems. I think that's why Kyle Shanahan absolutely jumped at the chance to hire him, because he can evolve the defense while also keeping it in its, original state, right? You could just add some bells and whistles, maybe diversify things moving forward, and maybe Romelo Height does fit that mold.
Yeah.
They have a wit score. I don't know if you've heard of this. The 49ers, their own scouting people, whatever it takes. And playing with your hair on fire puts you, higher up in the score. John Lynch said he scored at the very top of all their prospects in the whatever it takes score. And you watch his tape, and the guy does.
Funny you say that. It's funny you say that because I always take note of that. So, for instance, I have a sheet where I do strengths, weaknesses, transition. And my final point when I was done watching him, in my strengths category, I said outstanding playing personality, consistently played with high motor and high energy. So obviously they saw the same thing. But just to get to your point about Raheem Morris and then possibly doing some different things. I mean, they were very wedded under Saleh to playing, with a 4-man down line, pretty much rush 4. That's ideally how Robert Saleh wanted to play, and predominantly play zone behind it. Who knows what Raheem will do, because one thing you saw with Romelo Height at Texas Tech is there were times he kind of was deployed as a stand-up joker, rushing the quarterback from different spots. Who knows if, don't forget, Raheem was just, the head coach of the Falcons, where Jeff Ulbrich did a lot of different things on defense and a lot of things that were pretty cool and that worked. So, maybe Raheem is going to come in, and maybe Kyle has seen the need, to do some other things, as the game evolves. I mean, don't forget, the game is constantly evolving. You can rush with 4 and play 7 in coverage and zone if you have great players, but maybe you've got to do some other things, and maybe they're willing to try some different things.
Well, they haven't been a top 5 defense since 2022. It's actually been a while.
Yeah.
And, that leads me right to the 4th round pick. We'll talk about Kaelon Black in a little bit. I want to bunch up the defensive lineman. Grayson Halton, the tackle out of Oklahoma. This has been, over the past 14 months, going back to last offseason, the 49ers have completely reconstructed the defensive line. The only projected member of the top 8 rotation for the D-line in 2026 who was on the team in 2024 is Nick Bosa. So they have cleaned house. They had a big draft of D linemen last year. They added Romelo Height, and then they added this guy, Grayson Halton, out of Oklahoma, who's got a 36.5-inch vertical leap. He doesn't have long arms, and I think that's probably why he might have slipped to the 4th round, but he is disruptive and explosive. You mentioned Osa Odigizua, whom they traded for. I actually see some similarities size-wise, only 290 between Grayson Halton and Osa Odigizua.
Yeah, and he's totally different than Collins and West, who they drafted a year ago. And obviously, I'm sure they expect Collins to make a meaningful jump in his second season. But Halton he's an athlete. I mean, one thing when you watch Oklahoma's tape, and I'm sure you notice this watching them, is they were big on slants and stunts and having, Halton was an athletic player in their defense. He didn't just line up and try to hand fight, interior offensive linemen. I mean, I would say that he'd be most effective in the NFL, and this is what I said in my notes, in defenses that feature a good amount of slanting, stunting. He's got natural quickness and athleticism. He's got flexibility to attack gaps. He's got the body control and the burst to be a looper in stunt concepts. I mean, this guy's a quickness player. He's a twitch player. He's not, a physical, he's not Collins. It's totally different from the two guys they drafted a year ago. So now with Halton and Odigizua and Collins and West, they actually have a pretty diverse group of tackles that will become situational players. And, that's what, in a sense, that's what you're looking for. Rarely in this league, and there are some, obviously, really good ones, but rarely in this league do tackles play 70 snaps a game.
You want to keep them fresh, obviously. And
Yep.
I view it as in 2024, they had 2025, they were coming off of a horrific finish in run defense in 2024. They couldn't stop a nosebleed. So they let go veteran pass rushers and they brought in the guys you're talking about, Collins, even Michael Williams plays a lot inside, but he's a run stopper, right? He's a run stopper first.
Well, he played mostly inside. He played mostly inside when they went to their sub fronts. So if you're talking about base fronts, Collins and West played in their base fronts inside a lot.
Exactly. So a run stopping focus though in that 2025 draft. And now I think you have added the next level when you look at Romelo Height, obviously a pass rusher. And we talk about the disruption that Grayson Halton can bring. That's the diversified group that you're talking about. You have guys that can do a little bit of everything now.
Right. And see, not just because I'm talking to you, and as you probably know, I do, 49ers radio, but they're a fascinating defense now because of the different kinds of personnel they have. I'm very curious to see how they deploy this personnel because obviously, look, they know they have Collins and West. Collins was a second-round pick. You're counting on him to be a factor. Does he have to be Dexter Lawrence? No, but he's got to be a factor. West is an intriguing player as well, but he's also a bigger guy that's more of a run-type player. So they bring in Odigizua because clearly last year they couldn't rush the quarterback, and Odigizua is a very good interior pass rusher. So now they bring in Halton, who's also that style of player. Now, last year, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Last year under Robert Saleh, they moved Mikel Williams until he tore his ACL inside in their sub fronts. Maybe they'll keep him outside this year because they've got other, they've got Odigizua. We'll see what Halton does. We'll see. I mean, ideally, you'd love for Williams to become a quality edge pass rusher opposite Bosa.
So, with this 49ers defensive line, they obviously stopped investing in it at the level that they had early on. I think probably because they didn't have first round picks because of the Trey Lance trade in 2021, 2022, 2023. They either didn't have a pick or went to Lance in 2021. It's fascinating to me that now we're seeing this push the chips back into the middle of the table, because I'm sure as you've been watching the 49ers over the last 10 years, Greg, that defensive line early on, 2019, those years, that must have been a model, right? Compared to what you're watching around the rest of the league when they were at their prime. Has it been interesting to you to see the play there slip off and then to see this massive reinvestment over the past couple seasons?
Yeah, I mean, look, at some point, and it depends who your D coordinator is, obviously. Robert Saleh was obviously there for years, then he left, then he came back. And in an ideal world, what he wanted to do, and the D-line becomes really important in a Robert Saleh defense, because I don't think he wants to blitz at a high percentage. He did it last year at times because when Bosa went down, as you know, they couldn't really rush the quarterback very well. So at some point, you've got to impact the quarterback. And if you can't do it with 4, then you've got to find some way to do it, which means bringing more than 4. And of course, then you start bringing 5, and that also impacts your coverage. And they're very much under Robert Saleh. He's more zone-based than man-based. And then if you lose a player in zone coverage, that means there's more voids and more holes and more soft spots. So it has a domino effect. So none of us know exactly what Raheem Morris is going to do just because he's been exposed to a lot. And like I said, he was just exposed to Jeff Ulbrich in Atlanta, who was a high percentage blitzer and a high percentage man-to-man defensive coordinator. So that doesn't mean that's what the Niners will do as their foundation, but certainly it's something that is now in Raheem Morris, bag of tricks, so to speak. It's in his toolbox. So if he feels that that's something he can do with his personnel, and he won't know that till we start going through OTAs and mini camp and training camp, but that's, we don't know what the answer to that's going to be right now.
Yeah, I love the story of Raheem Morris and how it intertwines not only with Kyle Shanahan, they obviously were on staff in Tampa Bay together back in the day, but with John Lynch. Raheem Morris was the assistant DB coach, Greg, when
Yeah, I
John was a
know.
player in Tampa Bay. And
Yeah,
then, I think this kind of you probably appreciate this more than an average person. Raheem Morris coached on the offensive side of the ball. He was Kyle's wide receiver coach in
for
Atlanta.
for a number of
So,
years too,
yeah.
not just for 1 year, a number of years.
And
Yeah,
Kyle talks about it a lot because Kyle started as a defensive quality control guy in Tampa, and he thinks that was huge for him being an offensive coach, but understanding how defensive coaches see the ball. So Raheem Morris is the inverse, right? Defensive coach, but he's been on the offensive side of the ball. And I think when we talk about tactics of the game, that is really, really big.
you
Moving
can't
on
stay.
to
It's hard in this league unless you have unbelievable talent. Immediately what comes to my mind is a team like the Legion of Boom with the talent they have, and they could line up and play cover three pretty much all the time. But unless you have that incredibly high level of talent, there needs to be some diversity in what you do. Now you can't just line up and play. So, and I'm not saying that was Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh is a very, very good coach and has had a ton of success in this league as a coordinator. But I think that Kyle probably, my sense is you would know better being out there. I'm not out there during the season, obviously. But my sense is Kyle has seen the game evolve a bit, and he's a super smart guy, and he probably feels like there's some diversity that's needed on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what's happening. And as I've said, we've seen a slippage for the 49ers. And I think that, last year was tough to evaluate because so many guys got hurt. But I definitely think while they still had the majority of their players available, right before Warner went down, especially, the defense had been turning it around from
Yeah,
what we
yeah.
saw in 2024. So we'll see. We'll have a better sample in 2026. Now, speaking of the game evolving, I'm going to move to the offensive side of the ball. We saw 13 personnel last year, more than maybe ever. The Rams ran at 30% of the time, and we saw 21 tight ends drafted here in this 2026 draft, which
Yeah.
was the most in a 7-round era. The 49ers didn't take a tight end, but they took this offensive lineman out of Kansas, Enrique Cruz Jr., who's the fastest to tackle or offensive lineman in this entire draft class. And I just have to ask you, and I don't have any inside information yet on this. This is something I'll snoop around with, and I'll cover the 49ers as they practice this offseason. But is it possible? Because we saw this with Mike McDaniel last year in Miami. Daniel Brunskill, actually a former 49er, offensive lineman, played tight end, played like 121 snaps.
Yeah.
Do you see it as possible to see some of these ultra athletic, fast offensive tackles given this explosion in 13 personnel moonlighting as tight ends as these schemes evolve?
Ooh, I mean, you're dealing with a guy that is 6'5.5", 313. I mean, I don't know what, I'm real. By the way, I got to tell you, I knew nothing about this guy. Okay. And then, of course, I watched a lot of Jalen Daniels. I watched a lot of Kansas because of Daniels. They also had a wide receiver that I watched who ended up getting drafted, Emmanuel Henderson. I really liked Enrique Cruz, and I thought he was better than where he was drafted. So, this guy's got outstanding size and length. I mean, he's got almost 34-inch arms, almost 84-inch wingspan. I mean, it's remarkable that he ran a 40 in under 5 seconds. His vertical jump was 35 inches, which is nuts for a 313-pounder. I really, really liked what I saw on tape. And I thought, as I said, that he was better than being drafted in the 5th round at pick 179. So I don't know what their plans are for him. But, to me, down the road, and he played right tackle at Kansas, and I know they have Colton McKivitz. I don't know what his status is. I guess they signed him, to
before
a deal.
last season started. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's going to be the right tackle. And Cruz, look, when a guy's drafted in the 5th round, 179, rarely do you say, oh, well, he's going to be my starter. But I got to tell you, David, I really like this guy on tape. And guys like Cruz are one reason I love watching tape, because I knew zero about this guy.
Yeah.
Didn't even know his name until, I started watching tape. Because what I normally do when I watch a team is, I look to see who's draft eligible. So when I watched Jalen Daniels, I looked up Kansas and saw, they got a right tackle. You know what? I'm going to watch him too. And I came away feeling that this guy could down the road be a starting right tackle in the NFL. Now, it's not going to happen this year, and I don't know if they'll play 6 offensive line packages. I don't know. There's an expansion. 6 offensive line packages, some ways could be seen as adding a tight end, depending on how you line up. And more teams have done that. The Texans, I think, did it. They may have led the league in 6 O-line personnel, but I'm very curious to see, how Chris Foster deals with Enrique Cruz, because I think he can be a starting right tackle down the road.
I agree, and then I also saw the relative log jam with Trent Williams, obviously under contract now for 2 more years, and Colton McKivitz having signed, and I'm just connecting the dots in my head, seeing that teams are moving 13 personnel, and also, we could say it's an overlap there with the 6th offensive lineman. And I wondered, this guy's really fast, and this guy's better than I thought he'd be, because I also hadn't heard of him. And maybe they do have that up their sleeve.
Here's the other issue. Think about it this way. Let's assume health for Mike Evans. And now that they drafted Stribling, let's say you go 6 O-line personnel. Normally, teams are going to deal with that as if it's a run look, a run personnel package, and normally a run formation, okay? But now, if you line up Evans at boundary X, or let's say Stribling develops quickly and you line him up at boundary X, a team might not be willing to play just pure man, in a sense, 0 man on that player, and they might feel they need a safety over the top. So now all of a sudden, that gives you options in the run game, because a team can't just squeeze your run game because of the potential. I mean, look what the Rams did. They played a lot of 13. Now, don't forget, they had different kinds of tight ends, and we don't know what George Kittle's situation is going to be just at this point in time. But the Rams had different kinds of tight ends, so they threw the ball a lot out of 13 personnel. That was not just a run personnel package, as you well know. So again, Cruz is a 5th round pick, 179. We don't even know what his deal is right now. They could not even dress him for game. We don't know any of this. But I'm just saying that there's ways tactically to do things, and some of it could depend on what their boundary X receiver is, because if that receiver demands that a safety be involved in coverage, then you still got a lot of options in the run game with 6 O-line personnel.
Yeah, and that, I think, we're talking about a 49ers run offense that was its least efficient of the Shanahan era, and I think a huge part of that was the lack of a true X receiver, and the perimeter blocking wasn't great. And I think, as you said, Mike Evans is a math changer. He changes the geometry of the field with the safety that he can draw, or at least, just move the safety's eyes over toward that X receiver, and that can change a lot in a game of inches. Now, speaking of a potential beneficiary there, we can move to our last prospect here, Kaelon Black, the running back out of Indiana. I know that you said that you had not been able to watch Jaden Duggar and Carver Willis, so I want to just hop right over to Kaelon Black. And this is another guy who I think surprised people because he wasn't invited to the combine, but he should have been very, very visible because he played for a 16-0 national champion and saw a lot of work for them. Where he really splashed onto the scene, Greg, for I think the 49ers to finish their evaluation of him was the Senior Bowl, because he wasn't asked to catch a whole lot of passes at Indiana, but at the Senior Bowl, I thought he was very, very impressive running routes. And I don't know, maybe you even dug back into previous tape of him, but what at James Madison, I know you followed Curt Cignetti, he caught a lot of passes, but what did you see from him specifically at Indiana that you like?
Well, I really like him as a runner. I never know who's going to draft a player, obviously, when I evaluate a player, because this is all done before the draft. But when they drafted him, I thought to myself, that fits, because he is a downhill runner. He runs mean. He runs nasty. There's no hesitation. There's no tentativeness to him. He's just a really, really strong downhill runner. He'll initiate contact. I remember, and you probably saw this too, he ran over Dylan Thieneman this year. He's one of those backs that you look at, and he's a true sustaining back. And he's got enough juice that if a hole's there, he can take it to the house, but he's not a burner. But, he's a grinder and a sustainer, and he runs really, really hard. Again, those kinds of backs, maybe maybe he's not a starter. And again, I'm speaking about when I watched him before the Niners drafted him. Maybe he's not a starter in this league where I think, oh, he's going to carry 250, 260 times. Although, you know what I always come back to when it comes to backs and people talk about backs is I always come back to someone like Kyron Williams, who was a 4th or 5th round pick and has become a feature back because it depends on the offense and how a team deploys him and runs their offense. So, you know, again, who knows what they're going to do with McCaffrey, you know, this year. Maybe this is the year just because of age and usage where 2 possessions a game, they take him out just because, you know, he is getting older. I don't know. You know, obviously we know the guy is a workout fiend and is always in the best shape a human being could possibly be in, but there is wear and tear. But Black is a definite hard-nosed grinder. He's an attitude runner. He's a tempo runner. And I really liked his tape a lot. You know, it's hard to compare backs. You know, a lot of people, you know, I'm sure said that he was drafted too high. I don't think that's relevant. I think the Niners look at him as someone who fits the way they run the ball and they play offense. And by the way, they've run a lot more what we call gap scheme runs the last couple of years.
Yes.
Everybody automatically assumes, oh, well, they're a zone run team. And I don't think Black is a great zone. He's an inside zone runner. That's fine. But he's a really good gap scheme runner. He's probably not an outside zone runner. But the Niners have that's part of what they do, but not the way it was 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. So they've diversified their run game quite a bit.
They doubled their gap scheme rate, and there was a game that they would not have won against against Raheem Morris and Ulbrich and the Falcons. Right. Had they not embraced power, and they ran power probably 90% of the snaps in that game. So I think,
you know, it's funny. I saw somebody on social media say, I don't know why they drafted Black. You know, he's not a zone runner. That immediately told me that this person's not watching the 49ers. You know,
yes.
You know?
Right.
I
quote tweeted that. I said the same exact thing. It's like, have you been watching this team?
Yeah. You know,
the profile has changed. And I think, you know, maybe we could expand this to an overarching discussion. From what I gather, defenses have gotten lighter over the years. They're getting more athletic to combat the pass games that have been so prolific. And I think now we're seeing the pendulum swing back the other direction, and offenses are going to be running more. I think the data even showed that last year. And if you can bruise teams, if you could run power, then you could probably take advantage of the way that defenses might have overextended themselves to cover the pass game, right?
And the other thing that I think is interesting to me anyway, and I didn't do a study on this, you know, I'm one person, you know, teams do all kinds of studies, but they've got 25 people, you know, I'm one person. But I've always believed, and I actually saw Josh McDaniels say the same thing. And not that I'm smart. I'm not smarter than Josh McDaniels, nor was I the first person to think this. But I've always believed that play action is far more effective with your quarterback under center than in the gun. Yeah. And you know, the run game is much more diverse with your quarterback under center. So I think those two things go together really well. And I think you're seeing teams do more and more of that. I mean, look how successful the Rams were. You know, look how successful the Lions have been. You know, 2 teams that put the quarterback under center and have play action under center more than any team in the league. And we know that those 2 teams throw the ball extremely well. So, you know, again, I don't know what Kyle Shanahan's plans are, but, you know, under center is, to me, really much more beneficial, obviously for the run game, but also for play action.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, just to wrap this up, now that we've talked about all the prospects, big picture, you've studied a lot of Brock Purdy. Now, theoretically, if Mike Evans stays healthy, he's going to have that X receiver again. Hasn't really had a true X since week 7 of 2024. They've added some other personnel and De'Zhaun Stribling. How do you see this playing out for Brock Purdy? Just given the fact that I feel that he was playing with like one hand tied behind his back last year toward the end with all those injuries. So how do you see the outlook for him now that the 49ers have bolstered the arsenal around him?
Again, I'm just going to say this before it'll get me to Purdy. In some ways, I think we've lost the ability to celebrate quarterbacks in this league who are very efficient as ball distributors and executors of an offense. Obviously, we get really excited about the Mahomes, the Allens, the guys, Lamar for years, the guys who run around and make those special plays. And there's no question, because of the evolution of defenses and the issues they present, that particular ability has become a bigger factor in the league. There's no question about that. But you know, the ability to drop back and execute a pass game at a high level I mean, you know how it is. People talk about quarterbacks coming in the league and they say, well, he doesn't have great traits because in their mind, that means he doesn't throw it hard and he doesn't run around. But, it's a trait to be able to execute an offense at a high level efficiently and distribute the football. That's a trait, So otherwise, what, Drew Brees and Tom Brady didn't have any good traits? I mean, that's ultimately, and that's what Brock Purdy is. He's an executor and a distributor. Now, he's not unathletic, but obviously at his best, and if the Niner offense is to work to its highest level, it's because Purdy will be willing and dealing from the pocket. And he's really, really good at that. And it's an offense that's built on what we call pure progression reading. So it's very much a function of the play design. And I guarantee that Kyle Shanahan is thought of as one of the first, second, or third best doing that in the league. That. So, it's an efficient style of offense. That's the way they want to play. They want the run game to be sustaining and efficient. They want the pass game to be the same. And Purdy's really, really good at that. And so I've never understood what the issue was with Purdy. He's really good. He's not Josh Allen. If you want Josh Allen, then you might not like Brock Purdy. But Brock Purdy is really good at what he is, and that's what he is.
The answer, I think, Greg, is it comes back to both of our disdains for mock drafts. I think because he wasn't a consensus high pick,
right?
There's a group of people who just cannot compute that he might be good. Right. That maybe the consensus wasn't right on this guy. Maybe they missed because what you talk about, the processing and the ball distribution at the NFL level, that's not easily evaluated with a 40 time or with arm strength.
And by the way,
it's up here.
By the way, sometimes that's hard to evaluate watching college quarterbacks because the field is different. The hash marks are so wide. Sometimes it's hard to know watching college quarterbacks about processing because a lot of throws, relatively speaking, compared to the NFL, are simple. So sometimes it's hard to know, is he really processing or was that just the play call? And you know what? The guy's wide open because he's throwing it to the wide side of the field and it's as big as the Grand Canyon. So, so sometimes that's hard to know. So some of the traits that Purdy's shown in the league were hard to see at Iowa State because, you don't really have to show those traits to be an efficient college quarterback.
And now he has shown them for several seasons, and the 49ers have rebuilt around him. So we'll see how that looks. Greg, I know that you've been so busy over the last, you're busy all the time. You're grinding the tape 365, but thank you so much for joining me and going through this 49ers draft class. It's always fun to catch up.
Oh, David, that was a great conversation. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.